In today's viewer edit, I'm gonna take this absolutely stunning photo from Frank and I'm gonna turn it into a photo like this, while of course explaining every single step I do. First up, unfortunately this is a JPEG file, which means that we do not have all of the flexibility of course a RAW file, and at the end we won't have as much detail as in a RAW file. However, whether a JPEG or RAW file, the overall look is still going to be relatively the same, and all of the adjustments are still going to be pretty much the same. Just the overall quality and sharpness and detail will be a little bit less than with a RAW file, but you know, for the overall look it doesn't really matter that much. Alright, so because this is such a misty and such a mysterious kind of picture, which is very different to what I usually edit, I'm gonna have to change up my workflow, and instead of bringing up the shadows, which really kind of ruins the whole mood, you know, I think this very darkish mood, especially on the corners, works really well. So instead of bringing up the shadows, I might even bring them down just a little bit. I'm still gonna bring down the highlights so I can bring up the whites as far as possible without clipping too much at least. So that way we get a little bit of dynamic, but it's nothing that, you know, ruins the mood of the picture. Then to the blacks. Now I'm not quite sure. I don't really wanna, you know, make this too dark, make this too contrasty. Maybe I'm actually gonna try to bring up the contrast first, and in return actually bring up the blacks, so that way we get still a little bit of detail in these dark parts, but still the overall picture isn't too bright. So let's just see before any black adjustments here, and here's after bringing up the contrast and bringing up the blacks. So you see it's just a little bit more dynamic to before, and I think it works pretty well, and once again it doesn't ruin the mood. Then to clarity. Now clarity is gonna be very difficult. I don't think I'm gonna add any global clarity in either side, plus is definitely not working, and the minus, I like the minus look in the background, but for the foreground it's kind of a little bit too much. So let me grab an adjustment brush and just go a little bit into the minus clarity and paint over the background, so that way we get a little bit more sense of depth and really get to amplify the whole mood of the picture. So then, let's see, color temperature is another very important thing, and I don't really think I'm gonna do too much here. You could definitely warm that up and it doesn't look bad at all, but I really like this kind of relatively neutral look with just a little bit of warmth in these trees right there. So what I'm gonna do instead of bringing up the color temperature is just to go down to split toning to the highlights and add a little bit of orange, or maybe a little bit more towards the yellows in the highlights, just a little bit to give a little bit more color to the picture without really ruining this mood that we have here. So here's before that split toning, here's after. Before, after, just a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interest, once again without ruining the picture. Now let's see, tint is another thing. I really don't think I have to adjust the tint. I think it's perfectly fine here. And the last thing in the basics adjustments would of course be vibrance. And in this photo I don't really want to, you know, make this super vibrant, but maybe just a little bit plus could work quite well, since it really gives a little bit more life to the picture. So then let's go a little bit quicker with the other adjustments. Tonal curve. I think I'm gonna bring up the highlight slider here. Highlight slider in the tonal curve and in the basics adjustments are completely different. In the basics adjustments it really just affects, you know, the overall bright parts, whereas in the tonal curve down here it really just affects the very bright parts of the picture. So I'm gonna go a little bit into the plus here and just play around with the rest of these sliders. I'm gonna do a little bit plus darks, and in terms of shadows maybe, well, I actually think I'm just gonna leave them at 0. So let's just quickly check where we started at and where we have gotten in terms of editing. To the left is before and to the right is after. And I think, you know, usually I like to edit my pictures a lot and really dramatize them and everything, but it really doesn't work in this case. In this case, I really just want to bring out the natural look, the natural mood a little bit more. So let's continue with editing, and HSL tool, you could try to adjust the separate colors here, but I really don't think it has that big of an impact. So let's go down further. Split toning, of course, we've already added, and detail tool. I mean, even though this is just about the overall look, since of course this is not my picture, I'm still gonna add a little bit of sharpening. You preferably want to zoom in 1:1 here, so you actually see what looks the best. Usually I like to add around 50 to maybe 70 sharpening in my pictures, and regardless of which lens, which camera you've taken a picture with, sharpening can often help greatly to give even more detail out of your picture, and it's definitely noticeable in print. Also, a thing that you want to do is bring the masking slider to the right while holding down the Alt key, so you just want to make sure that you don't select any sharpening for non-textured surfaces, otherwise that will just introduce noise. And speaking of noise reduction, the noise reduction slider, I would not use that unless you absolutely have to, because if I bring that up here, especially in this very fine grass right here, you see how much detail you lose by just adding a little bit of noise reduction. So here is at 0 noise reduction, and here's at even just 40, and you see just so much detail lost. So I really don't like this slider, and don't use it unless you absolutely have to, if you have way too much noise. But the color noise slider down here is a completely different story. I absolutely love this slider, and I pretty much bring it to the right in all of my pictures. Now what you want to do here is just kind of go to the dark portions of your photo. In this kind of picture, I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see it, but if I bring the color slider to the right, it will just get rid of most of the green and purple sensor noise, which results in a way cleaner image. Now, once again, if you shot this at very low ISO and you haven't raised the shadows too much, this is probably not going to be that big of a difference, but in most pictures that I've edited, it really helps to give the whole picture a way cleaner overall look. So let's go quickly down to lens corrections. Just choose the lens here, and to get rid of the distortion, go to color as well, and just remove chromatic aberration to get rid of the purple and green fringing on the high contrast edges. Then I think the last thing I'm going to do in the global adjustments at least is go down to effects and just play around with vignetting. Now I absolutely love vignetting because it really helps to give amplify the mood and also give more attention towards the center of your picture. Of course this is completely optional, but I think in this case I'm just gonna add a little bit because I really think it works well in this particular case, before vignetting, after vignetting, and yeah, I definitely like that better. Now camera calibration, it really doesn't have that big of an impact, so I'm just gonna leave that out for the video's sake to keep everything a little bit shorter. So once again, let's look at the before and after any editing. Let's go in a different preview, and you see it's really not that big of a difference. It's just a little bit more amplified, the whole mood is a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more contrasty, so really the opposite of my usual edits, but I really think that works the best in this particular case. I am definitely going to amplify the lighting a little bit more. So the way you do that is just by grabbing the graduated filter over the kind of darkish area of your photo. So in this case, of course, the left is way darker than the right, since the right is where the light is coming from. So I'm just gonna add a graduated filter with a very soft edge over the left and bring down the exposure just a little bit. and then add another graduated filter in pretty much parallel to the negative exposure one, and this time go a little bit into the plus exposure, so that way you really get to amplify the whole lighting scheme, and as long as you don't overdo it, it really can help to give a little bit more interest for the whole picture. So I think the last thing that I'm gonna do in this particular case is just to add some dodge and burning. And dodge and burning is making individual parts of the image darker or brighter, and I really love to do that with the radial filter. You could also do that with the adjustment brush, but I really prefer the radial filter. So first thing, I'm gonna go into the plus exposure and just kind of see where some plus exposure could be needed. I think when I just add a little bit over this part, I think that works actually quite well. Then let's see if there's any other part. You could definitely play around with all the different sizes and also values, because of course some places need a little bit more exposure, others need a little bit less, but I'm going to go rather quick here and add just a little bit of dodge and burning, maybe even mix it with color in this particular case to make it just seem a little bit more natural, a little bit more organic. And I could actually go quite far in this particular one and raise the exposure even more, then make just this grass down here a little bit more interesting, drag another one, maybe just a very small one over these flowers to kind of amplify them, right click duplicate, and just see where it works, where it doesn't work. You really just want to complexify the light without making anything look unnatural. So I am going to add another one over there, right click duplicate, and definitely add a few smaller ones on this shore right here, and right click duplicate, another one over there, make it even smaller, rotate it accordingly, and let's see, is there any other spots I want to add a little bit of plus exposure? Maybe just in the water, actually, in the reflections, just make some trees in the reflections a little bit brighter, and then also go to the trees themselves and just make some a little bit brighter. So in terms of plus exposure, I don't think I'm gonna do too much here anymore. Maybe just another one in this left portion right here, and actually maybe adding a very big one over the pretty much background portion right here, and just add a little bit of plus exposure along with a little bit of warmth, so that way it even seems like the lighting is coming from the right even more, and it gives even more dynamic to the picture. So let's just quickly see before any dodge and burning and after. So you see it's just a little bit more interesting, a little bit more dynamic, and as long as you don't do it too much, you really only help and benefit your picture. Then let me finish up with negative exposure dodge and burning, which means of course bringing down the exposure, and I really love to bring them kind of in between, just make the dark parts a little bit darker, maybe even add some custom vignetting, and that way you really get to amplify the whole picture even more and set a sort of contrast between light and dark. So I really don't think I'm gonna add too many negative exposure filters in this particular photo, but just maybe one over here, and it always helps to just kind of drag it around, and maybe there's a spot you like. For example, I think just going in between those trees and the reflection and going down in the exposure a little bit works quite well. Maybe even go in the trees themselves and add a little bit of minus exposure there, right click duplicate, maybe just amplify the shadows in the trees right here. And I don't think, once again, I'm gonna add too many, so let's just say that I'm done here. I really don't think there's anything else in terms of adjustments or dodge and burning needed. Here is before any dodge and burning, and here is after. Always seems kind of obvious at first if you see the direct comparison, but once you look at the picture for a while, you really start to notice that it really looks more dynamic without making the picture look fake at all. So I'm gonna say that I'm done here with this particular photo, so let's go into history and see where we started at. This is the unedited version of this picture, and this is the after. So once again, not a really big difference, but it definitely helps out the picture a lot, makes everything a little bit more contrasty, a little bit warmer, and I think it works pretty well for this particular case. So I hope you've enjoyed this video where I don't really edit pictures all that much, but rather stay with a relatively calm and natural look. If you did so, please leave me a thumbs up, it really helps me out a ton and is hugely appreciated. Once again, thank you very much, Frank, for submitting your photo. I think it's an absolutely beautiful picture, and I absolutely love to edit this. It's really nice to kind of go different with the editing that I usually do, and that's really refreshing, and I hope you've at least got some inspiration, or at very least another impression of your photo. So thank you all, of course, very much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more videos just like this one if you haven't done so already. I hope you all have a great day, keep taking awesome pictures, and as always, take care.